Okay, my friend, welcome to the Pickle Show. And I'd like to introduce here, this is my helper. Her name is Fael. This is my friend Yoma's Fish, who I am babysitting during quarantine. She's my helper, my taste tester, perhaps. And I'd like to introduce over here Junior's Jazz Band. That's Jazzy Girl over there on the keys. Thanks, Jazzy. Okay, so we have a ton of stuff to go through. Like I said earlier, there is a Dropbox file that I uploaded in the chat room that you guys can reference for everything that I'm going to talk about. And I guess the first thing that I wanted to talk about is why pickle anything? I personally like to eat a lot of pickles just because I feel like it's good for my gut, and it's also just like something that I like to have around always to throw into different meals. And so, sometimes it'll be a thing where I like buy cabbage, or I'll buy like cauliflower and I'll make curry with the cauliflower, and I'll make something else with the cabbage. And then I realize that I have like half of a cabbage left over in my, fridge, and I don't know what to do with it. Or I have like half of a cauliflower in my fridge and I don't know what to do with it. So a lot of the times I will just break that stuff up and start pickling it. And the difference, I think, too, is that there's kind of two different ways to pickle or ferment things. And like I sort of have gauged that like the difference between the two is that pickling is kind of has more to do with like a vinegar, like vinegar. And then fermenting has more to do with like salt. Like you leave something in salt for long enough and it like ferments. So that's kind of like the what I sort of, and it's also different processes of like pickling something or fermenting something. So that to me is kind of like the base difference of that stuff. And then, like the other fun part about this is like seasoning. So I like it's kind of important to season your pickling or your fermenting stuff, because otherwise if you don't, it just ends up tasting just like some vinegary thing. So a couple different seasonings that I have here that are good for pickling is bay leaves, coriander, fennel seeds or dill seeds are really good too. Caraway seeds, mixed peppercorns, allspice is also good. Chili flakes too, when you want to like spice something up. And there's a couple different like, there's a couple different combinations of stuff that you can use. Cloves are also really good. Cumin, mustard seeds. Mustard seeds are like very kind of important for like dill pickles. And so those are like generally more or less the seasoning spices. And then also, again, there's a Dropbox file in the chat room that you guys can download for everything that I'm going to talk about here. All right, and then we have the different kinds of vinegars that you can use. I have rice vinegar, apple cider vinegar.
Damn, son, where'd you find this?
At the stove. And then we got sherry vinegar, red wine vinegar, and white wine vinegar, which is like the most classic one. White wine vinegar is good because it basically, it just tastes like straight vinegar. So if you don't want to like, complicate your like the taste in your mixture that much, you just use like white wine vinegar would be probably like the safest thing. The other seasoning that's important for this is garlic. Garlic is like really important for a lot of pickling. Okay, so then we got the seasonings, we got the different types of vinegar, salt. A lot of people have like, a lot of people, there's always a question about what's do I have to use pickling salt or can I use any type of salt? So you can't really use any type of salt because there's this caking thing that happens with like regular like table salt that will end up like fogging your pickles. So you want to use like clean salts. Kosher salt is a good salt to use if you don't want to use just regular tables so you don't have to use regular table salt. Kosher salt's probably the best. The only tricky thing about using kosher salt is that usually it comes in like, and you don't know how, a lot of people don't know how to gauge how much you've salted something with kosher salt. But the best practice for that is just taste your pickle mix. Most people won't have pickling salt. So that's just kind of like, you know, I'm assuming that most people will not have pickling salt. You actually don't really need it. If you're gonna do a big pickle project, then yeah, sure, like buy pickle salt. But if not, kosher salt totally works. Okay, so that's the salt. Now, thanks guys. And this is Fael, by the way. Fael is my friend Yoma's fish. And, you know, she's pretty funny. She's like she's like my little helper over here. She's really funny. Sometimes she likes to taste stuff. And so, you know, I let her smell it, but I don't let her eat it, you know? She could smell stuff. Okay, so that's Fayez. She's helping me today. Okay, and then now we got different brines. There's a lot of different way to brine things. You can salt brine something, or you can vinegar brine something. So there's you know, like your classic bread and butter pickle, which would be your like cucumber pickles, right? So this is one version of a cucumber pickle that I have. These are like classic bread and butter pickles. And then you have this kind. Whoop. You have this kind, which is like, you know, the sliced pickles. And if you haven't seen yet, you know, I just want to give a little shout out to Junior's jazz band over here. Thanks, Jazz.
I'm sorry, I'm trying to make noise and it's not working.
All right, so there's two different ways to, you know, make a dill pickle. So one way is that you have all of your seasonings in the mixture. So you have like, you know, your coriander, your dill seed, your caraway, your spices, your bay leaf, your garlic, right? And then you'll have separately a warm water and salt mixture that you would have cooked ahead of time. And then you just sort of let that cool, and then you would throw that into your dill pickle mixture. Or you can have your seasonings and this would be the sort of vinegar pickle that you would kind of cook first. Your seasonings, you would cook them first, and then you would add a cooked version of your water, vinegar, salt, and sugar. You would wait and you'd cook that all together. You'd wait for it to cool, and then you pour it over. So one of these you can sort of pickle on your table and leave it out for like a day. Or the other one, you can cook the mixture, pour it over, and then put it in your fridge, and it'll still pickle that way. There's a couple of different ways to do it. It just depends on like what a recipe calls for or which way you're trying to do. Also, it really just depends on what's in your pantry and what's in your fridge, you know? Sometimes I run out of vinegar. And so if I run out of vinegar, there's ways to pickle something with just salt, you know? So those are like the two sort of different things that I have there. So there's a recipe in the Dropbox for a dill pickle, right? And there's two recipes for it. One of them is a salt fermenting process, and then the other one is a vinegar and salt and sugar mixture. So the salt, just the salt process, I would use this kind of pickle for. It's a Persian cucumber you know, cubed, and then I would use the salt, just the salt and the seasonings, and leave that out for 24 hours, and then let that pickle, and then, you know, let the salt kind of break everything down, and then probably by like 3 days you'd have like a good salted fermented pickle. And if you don't do it that way and you want to do like a bread and butter one, this would be good for like a, you know, like a meat plate or something, a charcuterie plate, that you'd have like a pickle, a mustard, you know, your cured meats and cheeses, and then you would do this kind of pickle, which is like a cubed kind, you know, and then you'd have all your spices already. You'd have your spices that you would cook on your, you know, stove, your spice, vinegar, sugar, salt mixture, and then you would kind of let that sit for about, you know, 15 minutes. Basically, you don't want it to be hot, because when that stuff is hot, you end up cooking your pickles. You don't let the actual vinegar, salt, sugar, and everything do the work. You never want to put a hot mixture into your pickle jar, because you'll just cook them. You always want to let it cool until it's totally cool. And then you can like seal that up, and this could pickle itself in your fridge. So those are like those two different kinds. All right, and then, yes, thank you guys. All right, so the next thing I'm gonna move on to is, this is your classic sauerkraut. Sauerkraut is fermented and not pickled, right? So the sauerkraut, the way that you do it, it's cabbage, right? So I only have like this little butt end of cabbage, because I, you know, chopped it all up, put a chop on everything. But so this is cabbage, it's shredded, okay? And then I added in here salt, kosher salt, and caraway seeds. So actually I didn't add that stuff in yet, so I'll do it now. Here's my caraway seeds. I'm literally taking like a pinch of it. They're in the recipes. If you're like a person that needs to see exactly like what the measurements for this stuff is, it's all in the PDF that I uploaded. And then if you're like me, who just kind of is like, I'm used to doing these recipes so much, so I just sort of like have this stuff memorized. I don't, you know, I do it by like, you know, look and taste and stuff.
Your hoops keep interrupting your.
Oh, are they?
Yeah.
Oh, thanks, Jazzy. I'm gonna take my hoops off, because Jazzy says that it's interrupting my thing.
Damn, son, where'd you find this?
Okay, so we got the sauerkraut, shredded cabbage. We got the caraway seeds. Now we're gonna put kosher salt in this, up in this bad boy. Okay, Faya, are you watching? Yeah, she's watching. Okay, so the kosher salt, I would basically do like that. So that to me was about a tablespoon, you know, of salt. And then the process for sauerkraut is really, really easy, actually. All you do is you just mash it up. Like with your hands, you're basically just squeezing and you mash it all up. And what starts to happen is the salt will start to like break everything down. And you'll start getting a really, really, really soft. You'll get it really soft. It doesn't take that long. It maybe takes about like 10 minutes or something. So everything gets like broken down. All the water starts to come out of the cabbage. And then you get it so that you'll start seeing that there'll be like a water buildup at the very bottom. And that's kind of like what you want. So you mash that up for as long as it takes. It doesn't take that long. And then you get something that looks like this. Yes, people. So then you get something that looks like this, which is basically just broken down cabbage that's like you've massaged into like a pulp. And then you have, I don't know if you can see that or not, but there's a little bit of like a mixture that's falling out of that. That's just the juice from the cabbage and from the salt, from just squeezing it all together. So this would be a salt fermentation. This I would just leave out. I would probably leave this out for me. I would leave it out for probably like 2 days. And then I would put it back in the fridge. The tricky thing about this stuff, which I can't say with 100% confidence, is how long this stuff lasts. Everybody likes to say like, oh yeah, you can leave this out for like a month, or you can leave this in your fridge for 2 months. But the truth is that like if you're taking this thing out and eating some and then putting it back in your fridge and like taking it out and putting it back, you know, and leaving it out for a little bit, it starts to change how fast something is getting pickled or how fast something is getting fermented. And also if you're like, you know, putting a metal spoon and stuff like that in it, like it starts to really change the whole process. So I never say stuff like, oh yeah, you can leave this out for a month or you can still eat this for 2 months. There's good ways to check to see if your pickle or something that you have fermented has gone bad. All right. So good ways to see is if your pickles start to get cloudy. If your pickle starts to get really cloudy and you start to see like a white film around it, that means your pickles are no good anymore. If you start to see a lot of bubbles, or like something that looks like foam, that means your pickles are no good anymore. Okay. And then also you can like taste stuff and it will taste it tastes less like vinegar and more like something really acidic and sour that doesn't taste good. So, you know, so that's like one thing to watch out for. Another thing, and like I feel like a common misconception with pickling is that people are like, oh, I have this thing in my fridge that's going bad, I'm just gonna pickle it now. Not a good idea, team. So the reasons why you don't want to do that is because basically you're gonna rot. You're gonna think that you're eating something pickled, but you're gonna be eating something rotten. So these are cucumbers that I was gonna use today, but then I looked at them and I was just like, these are bad. These have like white shit all over them. These aren't good, you know?
Yeah, Daniel.
I would have got so sick. So, and also if you start seeing something like this in your pickle mixture, this is bad. This is like, you're like, those are not good to eat anymore. I want to throw that out. So that's something to look for, okay? If you start to see white stuff at the bottom of your pickle thing, you basically, at that point, you've either used the wrong type of salt, or your pickles have some kind of like mold or something like that. Also, real quick, Lele, will you just make sure that you're checking the time and let me know when I have like 5 minutes left, because I'm not checking the time.
I'll tell you 5 minutes before.
Okay, cool. All right, so now we did our sauerkraut. We got the cool thing. I'm gonna leave this out for like 2 days and let it do its thing. Another important part about the sauerkraut or pickles in general is you wanna make sure that everything is submerged under your mixture. So it's either submerged under like your salt brine or your vinegar brine or whatever, because otherwise you're not everything will get pickled that way. So it's good to weigh stuff down. I do not buy pickle weights. I'm just like, you know, I don't do it. Like there's a lot of different ways that you can weigh something down. One of the ways that I find that's really cool is if I'm pickling something in glass, sometimes I'll take a top of like a Tupperware and I'll just push everything down into the mixture so that all of my pickles are under the mixture, right? So that's like one rule of thumb. Or you can put something else that's like glass in it and you can weigh it down with that as well. So now I also want to go into the storage, how to store pickles. There's a lot of different ways to do it. There's ways that are safe and there's ways that are unsafe. The general idea is that metal is not good for pickling. So you don't want to pickle anything that's like some kind of metal can. The safest thing that I actually pickle with, that's the easiest thing for me, and that has like a wide brim, is actually these kinds of Tupperware. You can totally pickle stuff in plastic and it's safe. It just has to be food grade plastic. And how do you know if something is food grade plastic? In your PDF, I included a little, like a screenshot of like the different kinds of food grade plastic, okay? Generally, the kind that is safe and that you guys will probably see in stores is a kind that has a number 5 or a 4 on the bottom. And you can see it on your plastic Tupperware. If you look through it, you'll see like the recycle sign, and in the middle it'll have a number. So the number 5 or the number 4 are plastic that is food grade and safe to pickle in. I prefer actually pickling in Tupperware that's plastic, just because a lot of the times what I find is like these bigger ones that have a wide brim, which means that I could fit something on top of it to weigh it down. The problems that I have with pickling things in mason jars is stuff like this. I'll have a jar that I'll save from something else, like a pasta sauce or something, and it'll have this really, really like small brim, which will mean that I can't fit as much stuff in it, and then I can't stick something in it at the top to weigh everything down.
Damn, son.
And thanks, Jazzy. And so, you know, like these are not really good for me. And then also, a lot of the times these come with this kind of cap, which is a metal cap, an aluminum cap, you know? And sometimes they don't have like that plastic, they're not covered in plastic all the way on the top. So if I fill something totally to the brim, you know, with vinegar and it's touching the metal, that metal that's up there will spoil my pickles or my ferment, you know? So that's like part of the reason why I don't like using mason jars. You can use mason jars. There's a kind of mason jar that you can use that's all glass, and just the very top, it has just like a rubber seal to make sure that it has a clasp. It's called a Fido jar. Those are pretty good for that. These kinds of mason jars where it has this kind of cap, a lot of people like to pickle in these or can in these. I actually don't, because what happens is, I don't know if you guys can see that, but you see that rust that's on there? There's like a rust around that film, and it's because this cap and this cap are separate. So it's like sometimes these won't close right, or you'll get like, you know, juice or whatever that'll seep into this other side, and it'll start to like rust your like metal. So a lot of the times these don't really seal right for me. If I know that I'm going to make something and it's like going to completely not touch my vinegar or salt mixture, then I'll use this. But if I know that I'm going to have juice to the top, then I don't use them. For the most part, though, I think these are the most effective. Also, am I yelling? I can't tell because my like headphone. Okay, cool. Okay, so then let's see. I'm gonna look at my notes really quick. So that was storage. We talked about brines a little bit, and then the difference between pickling and fermenting. We talked about seasoning. All right, so now the different types of brines, and like just general good rule of thumb with brines. The way that I see it, it's a 2-to-1 process. So you'll have 2 cups of water, 1 cup of vinegar, or like, you know, 4 tablespoons of sugar, 2 tablespoons of salt, you know? So that to me is like kind of like a 2-to-1 type of thing. Generally for pickle mixtures, that's kind of what it is, but it also depends on like how much stuff you're pickling. Cause it could be like, you know, 1 cup vinegar and then, or sorry, 1 cup water and then like half a cup of vinegar, you know? So it just depends. Sometimes I make really, really little glasses of pickles like this, as opposed to like something like this, you know? I just, for the most part, it depends on like what's on my fridge and how much do I think I'm gonna use something. Or, you know, like I also just like to have like sauerkraut around, or I like to have different kinds of, there's a very, like a kind of famous Italian pickle mixture, you know, which I think Emma over here, what's the name of it? Giardana, or what is it? Lele, Emma?
I think it's Gardenia.
Gardenia, that's
I believe
the
so,
one.
because
Yeah.
we call it garden pickle. By the way, you're on 5 minutes. If you can keep going, but you have 5 more minutes.
Nice. That was cool. Okay, so yeah, that one will usually have like, you know, it'll have cauliflower, jalapenos, carrots, olives.
My favorite.
Yeah, that's a really good one to have. There's also like a Mexican version of that, which will be like jalapenos, carrots. Yeah, which that one I like to make around, I like to make a lot of that one too. Another weird pickle that I like to make is tomatillos. Tomatillos are really, really fun to pickle. They get soft and good and kind of weird, and I love it. Like I just, this is a really cool pickle to make. So tomatillos is a pickle to make. Cabbage you can pickle, or cauliflower you can pickle in a kind of a bunch of different ways. You can pickle it in this way that I just showed you with the carrots and the jalapeno mixture, or you can do this with like fresh dill seeds, mixed peppercorns, bay leaf. That's a good one. Another weird one that I like to make is pickled potatoes. Pickled potatoes are like, another weird one. I like to do pickled potatoes and like cauliflower. That's a fun one. My favorite is probably like the classic Bloody Mary pickled green beans. That's like one of my favorite. There's 2 recipes that I included in that in the file that's in the chat. But pickled green beans are really good. There's 2 ways to do it. You can do it like really spicy. You could even and yeah, so those are kind of like, that's everything. That's brines, storage, seasoning, the difference between pickles and fermenting. And good rule of thumbs is do's and don'ts about brines. Never put hot brine into your pickle mixture because you're going to cook your pickles. Never put hot brine. It has to be like cool. Okay. Also, if you're gonna when you're gonna cook your seasonings and your brines and stuff together, leave your garlic and your fresh herbs out of it. Just put your dry goods and your vinegar, your water, your salt, and your sugar when you're making your brine, because then you're gonna cook. You don't want to cook your fresh herbs. So like the garlic and the garlic and the cucumbers will go in the jar first, and then you pour the rest of your brine into that. So yeah, I guess that's that, my team. Thank you for coming to the Pickle Show. Thanks so much over here. Junior jazz band over here.
Thank you. I put the link again on the chat. I don't know if people had lost it earlier, but it will all be on the YouTube. So it'll be on the bottom of the YouTube page too.
I see the chat going off right now. Is that anything I need to know about, guys? If there's any questions right now, anybody want to ask me any questions really quick?
So the Italian one was called Giardiniera. That's something that Tauba brought back. Cool.
Okay, cool. So if nobody has any questions, I would, and if you do, most of everything that I talked about is going to be in that Dropbox. And one of the kind of sneaky things that I did is that I have this cookbook that I really like from this restaurant called Jalepenos that I worked at, which is where I learned how to pickle. And they have a cookbook where they made, they have a bunch of different pickle recipes. So I screenshotted a bunch of it for you guys. And I organized it in a PDF and I put it in there, but don't tell anybody that. I mean, this thing's going to get archived, but I'm sure, that, whoever made that book, whenever, come and find me for like, 27 pages that I stole from them. But anyways, that's my show, The Pickle Show.
Thank you so much.
Woo! Have fun, you guys. Thanks so much for joining me, and see me on the 22nd for the Coqueta Bunny Jr. Takes variety show. Bye, guys.